Crossing from Hour, Chapter 8, Zigaretten-Rauchen.
As Shayla and I crept down the dark corridor, I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. Suddenly, the door shut heavily behind us, startling us both. The corridor had now become even darker. Shayla pulled me closer to comfort her. There were obscure paintings of noble fish hung lopsided on the red walls. I presumed that these were former kings and queens, perhaps even relatives of mine. The wallpaper was growing mould at each corner of the long hallway. Cobwebs made by an unrecognisable creature dropped from the golden chandelier and nearly stroked me as I walked underneath them. We approached a red door. Shayla slowly turned its faded brass handle, and it opened slowly. The burning bright light of the other side stung our eyes so much we had to blink repetitively until they adjusted. There was a weird smell in the air, a very smoky sort of smell.
And once you're out of the picture, I'll come out from hiding and unleash my whirlpool upon Britopia and Dairyland, destroying both.
A slimy, loud voice bellowed. The voice cackled so loud it echoed in the corridor me and Shayla were hiding in. I peered behind the door to see a beastly figure of an octopus. Her fat black tentacles loosely swayed as her vicious yellow rows of fangs deflected in the orange light of the fire she had as hair. Her beady, bloodshot eyes looked thirsty for blood as she seemed to circle a victim. That victim was my mother, and that beastly octopus woman, the Andarian queen. I gasped. How could something so vulgar, so ugly, be related to me? No wonder why she never left the castle. I whispered to Shayla what I could see. It was clear my mother was tied up. Her blonde hair seemed scruffy. This was the first time I'd ever seen her look so distressed. Her broken blue eyes looked helplessly at her sister.
Why would you destroy both lands?
My mother asked, bravely.
Your people have done nothing to you. And what about the Britopians? I made sure they never crossed the wall as we agreed. You can't go back on your deal.
My mother was now shouting. The Andarian queen wrapped her thick, greasy black tentacles gently around my mother's neck. She took a puff from a large cigarette she had in one of her tentacles and laughed, blowing smoke out of two slits on her face, which I guessed was her nose.
I've had years to plan this, dear sister.
The Andarian queen sinisterly spat as she inhaled another breath of smoke from her cigarette.
You see, when Daddy died, I wanted the ocean to myself, but you just wouldn't let me have it.
My mother went to speak, but her mouth was smothered by the Andarian queen's long tentacle.
So I had to think of another way to get what I wanted.
She continued.
And then I thought, what if the sweet Shona queen was to disappear? So I sent my dear Drogon out to grab you, so we could make that happen.
She smiled so evilly it made me feel sick.
With you gone, I bet Britopia mourn your loss. None of those guards of yours would dare to cross the wall to get you back, because they're all too scared of what I do to them.
She snorted a putrid laugh.
And then I destroyed both sides, so no one would be loyal to you, and I'd start the whole new empire fresh. Just think, a whole empire of super sharks.
She looked cruelly at my mother. My mother then whispered an angry protest, which I'm pretty sure would have been very rude if her mouth wasn't covered.
Now shush, sis. I'll make this as painless as possible.
She laughed hysterically at her own joke.
Who am I kidding? This'll hurt.
She held a faded silver dagger up with her fat tentacle whilst cackling heavily. No! I shouted, hidden behind the door. The ugly octopus turned her fat head to look towards where Shayla and I were hiding.
Wer ist da?
She bellowed. Shayla tried to hold me down, but I pushed her off and stood up, revealing myself to my auntie. She chortled at the sight of me. My mother's eyes widened in utter shock or fear. If she could have spoken, she probably would have yelled something like,
Lockig, why aren't you at home? What are you doing here? Have you done your homework?
The enormous room had a towering window behind the two sisters, a dining room set that sat to the side of me, and a large rug that was covered in cigarette stumps.
Ich bin deine Tante.
She laughed again. She was really starting to get on my nerves. I wasn't sure why she was speaking German. All I knew is that this woman had to be stopped. I started to walk towards her.
Ich heiße Zigaretten-Rauchen.
She introduced herself. I walked faster. I prepared to pounce at her.
Halt!
She screeched as loud as her smoke-ridden lungs would allow her. Zigaretten-Rauchen flashed her yellow fangs at me and giggled aggressively. I did not stop.
Hört mit zu,
she commanded. I ignored her German commands again. All of a sudden, she violently threw a dagger at me. With a flick of a tentacle, it was sent flying, spinning uncontrollably at the great speed towards me. As it flew towards me, I could not move. I was paralysed by fear. And then Shayla leapt heroically in front of me. One of the seashells she wore as a t-shirt deflected the sharp knife like armour. She sat up and handed the dagger she had caught to me. Zigaretten-Rauchen shrieked at this event.
Drohung!
She called. A huge scarred shark emerged from the blackness of the room and swam stealthily at us. It hovered arch-backed above Shayla and I. Blood-hungry, it awaited its orders.
Totet Z!
The octopus screamed with excitement. Shayla grabbed a chair from the floor and hit the shark with it. It appeared dazed for a second.
Save your mum, I'll distract the shark.
She shouted, before she ran off in the opposite direction to me. The shark quickly followed her until I could no longer see either of them. Zigaretten-Rauchen hauled herself closer to me, throwing furniture from one side of the room to the other on her journey. For an obese octopus, she was pretty fast. I didn't have much time. Petrified, I held the dagger like a dart and imagined Zigaretten-Rauchen was a dartboard. I played darts before, but never as scary as right then. She was so big, she wouldn't be hard to miss. I threw the dagger. My eyes were held so tightly closed I could imagine myself back in Britopia, back in my castle, back with my friends, but I wasn't. My eyes opened to see the dagger hit the fat octopus. Her vicious smile laughed as she split like a balloon. Black soot started flowing from her wound in a thick, toxic substance. She was hauled back as the smoky insides blew her across the room, so fast she collided with the grand window, shattering it. And like that, Zigaretten-Rauchen finally left her castle before she exploded into a million slimy pieces. The ground shook aggressively. The ceiling dropped dust as the whole dark castle shook violently. Earthquake! The castle started to crumble. I ran towards my mother and untied her, screaming, "Shayla!" the whole time. I heard no response. Once my mother was untied, she dragged me towards the door. I resisted, screaming, "Shayla!" back into the darkness. But again, she did not respond. And then we were overlooking the castle that crumbled into a pile of rubble as if a giant had stepped on it. And Shayla was nowhere to be seen.